Greetings, friends. I am Vitaly Portnikov. The supreme leader of Iran, Ayatollah Khamenei, asserts that Tehran will never allow its border with Armenia to be closed. The Ministry of Foreign Affairs of the Russian Federation states that the creation of a transport corridor, which will connect Azerbaijan with the Nakhichevan Autonomous Republic and further with Turkey through the territory of Armenia, must take into account Russia's interests. Let me remind you that earlier, Moscow expected that servicemen of the Federal Security Service of the Russian Federation would control this transport route. And one of the generals of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, Saad Javani, speaks much more frankly about the consequences of the agreement reached by Azerbaijani President Ilham Aliyev and Armenian Prime Minister Nikol Pashinyan in the presence of US President Donald Trump. He claims that the leaders of Azerbaijan and Armenia have repeated Zelensky's mistake and the consequences for them will be similar. To begin with, let's try to decipher what exactly Zelensky's mistake was. Obviously, this is a mistake that applies not only to the current Ukrainian president, but also to his predecessors. It is connected to the fact that Ukraine, except perhaps for the period when Viktor Yanukovych was at the head of our country, was not going to follow in Russia's wake or give up its sovereignty in favor of Moscow and its allies. It is precisely this unwillingness of Ukraine to become a Russian satellite that truly led to the years-long bloody war waged by Russia against Ukraine. And the Iranian general simply stated the main reason for this war, no matter how much they tried to conceal it in the Russian capital. The fact that Azerbaijan and Armenia have decided to establish a transport corridor with the support of the United States also speaks to the strengthening of the sovereignty of these two neighboring countries. For decades, both Baku and Yerevan were caught in a real Moscow trap, and the Kremlin pitted the two peoples against each other in order to secure its own influence and benefits on foreign soil, to hold back the economic development of both Armenia and Azerbaijan, and to ensure that the Caucasus remained a dead-end region. And for Iran, there were its own advantages here because Iran remained one of the few open economic routes for Armenia. At the same time, Tehran tried to maintain its own, albeit very complicated, relationship with Azerbaijan. Now, as the ongoing and significant creation of the vital transport corridor steadily progresses, both the Republic of Azerbaijan and the Republic of Armenia, and by the way, the nation of Turkey, and in the foreseeable future, I sincerely hope, the country of Georgia, will no longer require the essential services provided by the Russian Federation and the Islamic Republic of Iran. Consequently, Moscow and Tehran may indeed begin to seriously consider that the potential and severe consequences for leaders such as Ilham Aliyev and Nikol Pashinyan could be strikingly similar to those challenging and difficult experiences that post-Maidan Ukraine unfortunately experienced firsthand and profoundly endured. When sheer force and the brutal realities of war become the only undeniable proof of capability within the region, rather than genuine economic and political cooperation. Granted, it is currently quite difficult to imagine Russian aggression, for example, against Azerbaijan or Iranian strikes on Azerbaijan and Armenia. Both countries are focused on other conflicts. Virtually all of the Russian Federation's resources are concentrated on the years-long and bloody Russian-Ukrainian war in which Vladimir Putin has still been unable to achieve the goals he was counting on back in 2022. And to imagine that part of the Russian army, instead of continuing to fight against the Ukrainian defense forces, would start an aggression against Azerbaijan, well, that's something out of political science fiction. All the more so because Putin is unlikely to risk his special relationship with Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan, especially at a time when Erdogan theoretically gains the opportunity for a direct territorial connection with Azerbaijan. Iran, too, has been defeated by the efforts of Israel and the United States during the recent 12-day war. And it is unlikely that Ayatollah Khomeini or the leaders of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps will now give Donald Trump a reason for new strikes against Iran. After all, starting a war with Azerbaijan and Armenia in order to prevent the creation of the Zangezur corridor, which is supposed to be controlled by the United States, would be a blow not even to Israeli, but specifically to American interests, which creates real grounds for US intervention in the situation. But that's as of today. But we understand perfectly well that the authoritarian regimes in both Moscow and Tehran are playing the long game. Vladimir Putin has no intention of going anywhere, and Ayatollah Khomeini will also continue to rule Iran until the very end of his natural life. Their chosen successors are highly likely to continue the aggressive and confrontational course that has distinctly defined the foreign policy of both the Russian Federation and Iran in recent decades, a course fundamentally based on real and direct confrontation with the United States and other Western countries, and on persistent attempts to diminish the economic influence of the United States and European countries through overt aggression and the deliberate destabilization of sovereign states that genuinely wish to free themselves from Russian and Iranian influence and thereby create significant opportunities for Western countries for mutually beneficial trade in strategically important regions such as Central Europe or the Caucasus. And as we can see, this provokes threats and fury every time. And where there are threats and fury, there is preparation for a real war. Therefore, of course, we should not let our guard down when it comes to Russian and Iranian intentions. What seems impossible today could become a real large-scale war in the Caucasus as soon as tomorrow. At the very least, we must understand that Moscow and Tehran will be discussing possible plans for this war or joint actions aimed at political destabilization in the region, particularly the political destabilization of Armenia itself in light of the upcoming parliamentary elections in that country in 2026. After all, an attempt to establish a pro-Russian and pro-Iranian government in Yerevan could be Moscow's first step toward making Armenia abandon the agreements that were reached between the United States and Azerbaijan. We already know how this was done in the case of Ukraine, and we understand that in the case of Armenia, Moscow and Tehran may use the same dangerous tools to influence the electorate in order to gain benefits for themselves and not at all to protect the Armenian people. Thank you, friends. Stay tuned to this channel, subscribe to it, follow me on social media, and check out my Patreon, Buy Me a Coffee, and Donatella channels, which help support and develop these resources. Make use of the sponsorship feature right here on YouTube. Peace to you all.